רכישת רוח ים מנשבת מאי שם וכביסה מתנפנפת לצילי החומה بين الأرض والسماء ناس كتير بعيشوا سوا ما تخافوا تحلموا بالسلام والأمان متى يمسوا خمات بخار ושבתי מגלותי ייפתחו שעריי אל הטוב האמיתי
I want to thank you for standing up for peace alongside your Palestinian sisters. I want to thank you and to let you know that in the world that we live in, peace is possible only when women of integrity and faith stand up for the future of their children. Congratulations. It is my hope that you will continue to battle for peace in a constructive way. And I look forward to the day that I will come and join you. Thank you for the children of Israel. Thank you for the children of Palestine. Thank you. Peace. Shalom.
From the north to the south, from the west to the east, hear the prayer of the mothers. Bring them peace, bring them peace. From the north to the south, from the west to the east, justice and bring the last, bring the from the north to the south, from the west to the east, justice and bring the
My name is Bonface Beti. I'm very I'm an artist and also peace builder. So I am here today. It's my great pleasure, privilege. I'm a Kenyan, um, to be able to connect with global community of artists, educators in this lab. So I am a founder of Mama Afrika Theatre Lab for Peace, Imaginable Futures and Action. And also we have storytelling projects called Ubuntu. Ubuntu is an indigenous name in Southern Africa, which means I am because we are. And it speaks to the philosophy, the African philosophy of being together and our social connection, our assets of being together. So I will be leading, I'll kind of be reflecting together with us. So Mama Afrika Theatre Lab for Peace, sorry, sits at a very, it exists in the liminal spaces. Maybe I would like to request Madeleine to, maybe you can start to share this, help me to, yeah. Yeah, so, Mama Afrika Theatre Lab for Peace and Imaginable Futures is based on the work that I have done over the years as a theater maker and as well as a peace builder. I was a peace builder before I was a theater maker before I became a peace builder. So I have worked, as you will see in my presentation. So I'll be using the presentation a little bit, and then we'll also do a little bit of interactive activities, some things to keep us kind of in the here and now as we proceed. But just to tell you what Mama Afrika Theatre Lab for Peace, which is the reason why this lab, this think tank today is hosting this lab. It's because there is huge consensus in the world. Most of you are artists, educators, working at various intersections of the arts and social justice, social change, and social transformation. And there is no doubt globally that the arts are, so they are engines of transformation and they are allies of oppressed people everywhere in the world. Artists live in the liminal spaces where imagination happens and where ideas can be challenged, especially conventional ideas, and also where ideas can be expanded. And that is where my lab comes from. My lab believes, and together with those who are working with me, we believe in the fact that the arts are not just an add-on. For example, when you think about climate crisis or when you think about education, social education or social transformation, civic imagination or social imagination, the arts are not just an add-on, or they are not just working, because that has already been established, but the courage that the artists embody and the artists embrace in the face of crisis, like we have just seen in the previous short video about what is happening today. Everybody is having collective trauma globally because of the conflicts that are happening around the world at the moment. And if you go to all these areas, you'll find artists are keeping hope alive by supporting people, like the music we've just witnessed that has told us the story of hope for the future and peaceful futures and sustainable futures, and what that looks like through artistic expression. So the lab that is Mama Afrika wants to accompany, just like in the social change world, there is a lot of talk about the theories of complexity, systems thinking. What about having this lab comes from the thinking that what is it that is so special and unique about artists? And what does artistic way of being in the world and artistic way of resolving complexity look like? And not just to stop there as an experiment, but to go beyond and say, what kind of practice can come out of artistic way of being in the world and artistic way of thinking? Because my lab has been invited recently to work with people, social entrepreneurs, who are working on resolving climate justice issues around climate justice, or even governance issues and governance crisis issues, migration and refugee crisis right now. But this lab is interested in kind of, and Madeleine, maybe you may, next slide, please. This lab is interested in seeking to understand what does artistic thinking look like, and what does artistic way of being in the world look like. So maybe the best way to explain, when I thought about my presentation, I thought about my own journey as a way of looking at what this is all about. My story is that I was street connected as a young man for many years, working in Nairobi streets. And theater was used as a process to reach out to me while I was still connected to the streets with others, as a language to engage me and to help me kind of transition from being street connected back to the community and back to doing what I do today, what I love to do today. And that project that I was associated with for many years as a young person, and also came back to work with the young people in this project, is the one that is here called Shangilia Mtoto Africa, that is still in existence in Nairobi, using theater as a language of engaging street-connected young people and children to find purpose and meaning for their lives, to come back into the community, to get education, but also to build relationship between them and the community members. I remember one of the poems we used to say when we were connected and doing this kind of work was that today we meet again. We have actually met again. Remember the skinny boy who approached your car and you quickly pulled up your window? Today we meet again. No cars, no windows. It's not easy to understand, but I knew between you and I, there is a bond, and the bond is the bond of humanity. And that is why we meet again today. This poem that we used to say still resonates today with the work that I'm trying to do through this Mama Afrika Theatre Lab for peace and imaginable futures and action. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as a storyteller as well, storytelling has given me kind of, I started to do my storytelling also at that stage. And storytelling, which is rooted as an asset in our African indigenous society, is not just for entertainment. We don't tell stories for entertainment. We create meaning by telling stories. We create community, we build community by telling stories. And that is why my lab and the lab that we have founded is interested in kind of looking at, for example, Ubuntu storytelling project is interested in looking, how do we amplify humanization and reclaiming our humanization through storytelling, for example, and walking back to the path of reclaiming our humanity out of the complexities of conflict, the complexities of forced migration, the complexities of gender-based violence, oppression, racial oppression, and even violence that we call epistemological violence that comes from knowledge, rather than also the knowledge of lived experience, which is always amplified by storytelling, becoming also prominent as a way of creating knowledge together and creating peace and sustainability, especially when you think about the issues of regeneration and issues of climate justice and climate crisis that we are facing at the moment. Next slide, please. And so the wisdom of the body, embodied wisdom, is something I have learned during my work and my practice within communities. The stories we tell through away from the frontal cortex all the time, and going into our bodies, the wisdom of the body. How can we build much more on this wisdom, rebuild, kind of reclaim this wisdom much more? This is where, and look at the image here where the kids at Shangilia Mtoto Africa are creating this kind of structure. What does this metaphor talk about in terms of our responses to the complexities, for example, of climate crisis, of conflict? What are these children doing by climbing very high, showing us possibilities that might not necessarily be captured through all the time? Of course, I know systems thinking is great. The theories of complexities being in the frontal cortex is great. But how about being in the wisdom of the body, expanding our knowledge through what this image, for example, what this picture here is showing us, for instance. And this is what the lab exists to kind of tap into. And next, please. And shared power. I see a lot of amazing things coming up. And then, okay. So working as an artist, I have also, okay. So then I started to work, and my colleague Maxwell, I saw him in this meeting, who is the director of Amani People's Theatre. So when we joined Amani People's Theatre is a theatre, an organization that has been using theatre to talk about, to transform conflict in most of Kenyan, transform most of Kenyan conflicts, especially since the advent of multipartyism in Kenya and the identity-based conflicts that happen most of the time after elections or just before elections. And I became part of this team of young people. We started to work with communities using theater, especially theater of the oppressed. And Amani People's Theatre actually created intersected African mediative elements into Boalian theater, for example, theater of the oppressed, to create a very new kind of theater called the People's Theatre. And we have worked with People's Theatre in Kenya and in most of African conflicts together in partnership with the Amani People's Theatre. That is just an example of what theater can do when you think about responding to protracted conflict, social conflict specifically. For instance, working in prisons and trying to kind of imagine what alternative justice looks like, restorative justice look like, or the difference between all types of justices, as you work with theater. So the lab seeks to understand how much can we expand this kind of ideas, but not stop there. How can we create a practice that facilitators like ourselves in this room can be able to use in our work as a practice that is based on artistic way of thinking and artistic way of being in the world as a process of transforming intractable problems that we face today. Next slide, please. So working in other cultures, I went to school, I was privileged to go to study, to do my graduate degree, my master's degree in Canada. And I got an opportunity to work with the indigenous people of Canada, of Winnipeg in Manitoba. You can imagine coming from 30 degrees centigrade and going to study in another culture where I survived minus 20 degrees below zero, and going to class, but also being a member of the Red Threads Theatre for Peace that is based out there in Winnipeg. And in these pictures, you can see working with the young people. Mostly some of them had lived in Nairobi, Kenya as refugees before they went to the second country of Canada. Some come through Kenya to go to Canada, US, or Australia as refugees from Somalia or some of the countries around our region that are affected by conflict. And I meet them in Winnipeg. We start to speak Kiswahili. We start to create playback theater together with them to talk about the stories of home. And not just home, like how did you flee from your country, but talking about, have you ever moved from a house in Edmonton and went to live in Vancouver? Or you moved from a house in Prince Edward Islands, went to live maybe in another city, you know, in Canada, and using playback theater as a storytelling container and what that means. And so when you think about, and this theater still exists, it's run by newcomer youth in Winnipeg. They run it today to bring the locals, the host communities together with newcomer groups in the city. So my lab looks at how do you expand this kind of ideas, and how do you find a practice that people, like young people like these ones running this kind of theater, can be using to kind of expand ideas about, for example, coming into a new country, you know, or being the intersectionality of being even a newcomer. How does that look like? The nuances that are very difficult to kind of rationalize, but you can be able to explore them using sculpture gardens, which is one of those art forms in playback theater, or using pairs, you know, or the rant, talking about what makes you angry in the new culture and how your anger can lead into can be transformed into another emotion, you know, the emotion of joy, for example, and how these things work together. Next slide, please. Yeah, so, and then working in a place like South Africa, which is a post-apartheid country, you know, and working with the young people in the Constitution Hill, where Mandela and the anti-apartheid icons were imprisoned, especially the women jail at Constitution Hill, and then having young people creating theater with me to imagine the future of South Africa from the young people's imagination, you know, using forum theater. And these are the experiences that have informed me to create, to work together to form Mama Afrika Theatre Lab for Peace and Future and Imagination, to kind of grapple with the complexities, for example, of the future of a post-apartheid country, racialized country, and the future of it. But how do you kind of create, how can you support institutions, post-apartheid institutions that are trying to heal South Africa or to imagine the future of South Africa using the arts as vehicles for, especially for cultural change or cementing of a culture of peace? What kind of practice, artistic practice, can be employed to do this kind of work? And next slide, please. Yeah, basically creating over COVID time, and I know Madeleine was one of the people that witnessed this theater, playback theater, the African Connect playback theater, that brought players from South Africa, Nigeria, and myself in East Africa to kind of talk about what does it mean to be African, especially in the pandemic period when we could not be able to see each other face to face with other artists across the continent. Next slide, please. As well as, as well as working now at the kind of arts policy level, higher level, global level practitioners, leaders and artist leaders from other, like, especially working at intersection between the arts and peace building across the globe, from Israel, from the US, and from former Yugoslavia, you know, from Belgrade, professor academics, working at that level, but also working at the grassroots level. How does that look like? How do you bridge those gaps and what can we garner, what kind of knowledge can we garner from that to use as a practice going into the future. Next slide, please. Winnipeg still, next slide. South Sudan, working with South Sudanese artists to look at how to prevent violence in a country that is war-torn, that has for many years been war-torn and suffered conflict for generations. And now it's a newborn country, the youngest in the world. And then you're an artist in this country. How do you bridge the divide between communities, break cycles of violence, create trauma-informed radio scripts and theater to schools, to teachers, and to communities, especially when elite conflicts, elite politicians pit their ethnic groups against each other? How does that look like? And what is that? What can we learn from that? This is what the lab is looking at. Next slide, please. Working in Kenya with police and the citizens, kind of dealing with the issues of the trauma of corruption, and that ruins the relationship between public and police. Next slide, please. Next slide. In the communities. And then the green leopard story, which is one of the most famous stories I've always told about how we grapple with the issues of justice, the issues of... So green leopard, in short, the leopard was never green, but he used to eat grass, and then all of a sudden he decided to eat meat. And then it brought a lot of conflict in the jungle. And because he ate the hare's child, and then ate the gazelle's child, he ate the hippo's child, and then one time the hare tricked him. He told him another green leopard was also coming to take the kingdom from him. And he was so angry, he said, "Who is that? I'm going to show him what I am made of." So he went to fight. And guess he was fighting his own shadow, because the hare tricked him. He took him where the river was very deep. He was looking at his own shadow in the water and fighting his shadow, boxed his shadow, kicked his shadow. And before long, he was drowning. Meanwhile, all the other animals who had lost their children being eaten by green leopard, they were watching this scene of the person they fear so much, they hate and they fear so much, is now drowning. And when we tell this story, whenever my grandmother told me this story, she never finished the story. So the groups have to finish the story. They have to say what should happen to the green leopard now that he is drowning and he's been committing atrocities. What should happen to him? And I have told this story to those children in South Africa. They told me their own reactions. I have told the story to children actually in Winnipeg, and they told me they ended the story differently. I have told this during an international community arts festival in Rotterdam, and the participants told me things that are totally different, and created different endings, created drama to end the story in very unique ways. So all this has become like a great learning experience, and that's why the lab is here. Next slide, please. So so that story has aspects of the cycles of violence, especially communities that have suffered historical traumatization, the cycles of violence, of reputation, conflicts that are very difficult to resolve because of past chosen glory and chosen trauma, as Vamin Volkan will talk about in the conflict and psychiatry world. The cycles of revenge, because of victims, how we frame victimhood, how identity conflicts make people to frame victimhood or perpetration, and how, as one of the eminent African scholars called Dr. Mahmoud Mamdani, teaching in Uganda, talked about the conflict in Rwanda between the Hutus and the Tutsis, talking about in the book where he said when the killers, when the victims become killers, so the woundedness and the trauma, and when that is not broken, how the cycles of violence repeat themselves. Next slide, please. Yeah, so ways, how do we break free from all this? Choice, power of choice, belief system security, intentional actions, all these kind of aspects, and how they can be framed through the metaphor of theater and storytelling and transformation. Next slide. And the fact that the path is not linear, storytelling, I talked about it. It's not linear. It's not cause and effect. It's messy, difficult to resolve. It's intractable. It's messy. So next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. But maybe before she goes, so the intergenerational piece of work, how can the arts expand ideas around intergenerational piece of work between the younger generation and the older generation, or the much older generation, or carrying the intergenerational mandate, so to speak, of social change, of social justice. Because a lot of the work we do today, the effect is intergenerational. And in my work with a lot of change makers, I have met a lot of frustration and people giving up the cause because they don't see change that they are working so hard for, risking their lives for happening in this moment. The arts can help us to kind of walk in that space before we see what we are almost dying for happening. The arts is that kind of the liminal space that is a metaphor that aligns itself with that kind of difficult place to put words on. What is that place when you are not seeing it happening, and yet you're risking your life, or you want to see it happening? Like now, a lot of people don't know what answers they can keep to the conflict that is happening in the Middle East, in between Ukraine and Russia, and all these kind of things. And yeah, so intergenerational. And like there's a lot of research that is talking about conflict or even crisis today and how it impact the next generation, intergenerational. In the conflict world, we have intergenerational trauma because of epigenetics, the study of intergenerational transmission of trauma. The next slide, please. And yeah, maybe you can end it now, and then you can have, how many minutes do you have? Yes, but before maybe maybe people can ask questions or we discuss. I want us to do a little bit of a warm-up activity. We are many, but that's fine. We can try with a few. That's fine, just to bring us into that. So one of the things I want us maybe to do, and I'll call your names on the screens, don't worry. I want us to do a small thing. I'll call people's names, try to give them. I want to give a small gift, and I want that gift to go around the Zoom room. So I'm going to give you a small bird. I'm going to give a small, and people, kindly, if you can be able to open your mics, that will be fantastic. But when I mention your name, I'm going to pass this small bird. It's a forest parakeet. We have them in Kenya in our forest. It's a small parakeet. I want to pass it to Madeleine, and you can receive it, Madeleine, nicely. It's a very delicate parakeet. It can escape, so you hold it, and you can pass it to someone else you want, the same parakeet to someone else. You call their name and you pass it.
Hey, I'm gonna pass it to Peter Atsu.
Yes, I've just received it gently, and just hold on a minute. Let me put it into my shirt first, and
Yes.
just be selfish a bit and take it out there, and I'm passing it to Eric Booth.
Yeah, and that can keep going. Eric, you can talk about it a little bit. Meanwhile, I'm going to pass another thing, so you can have the parakeet going, and then something else will also be going. So Edwin,
Hey.
my friend Eric, keep going.
Yes,
I'm
go,
going
little
to
parakeet.
I'm going to pass a ball, a small ball. I'm going to pass it to Amanda, and Eric, you can pass the parakeet to someone else. Amanda, you have the ball.
Parakeet to Jen.
I have it here, Eric. It's beautiful colors.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to pass this parakeet to Kate Rudder. Here it comes, Kate. It's very
And
tiny.
the ball can also be passed.
Yes, I was just waiting. I'm going to pass this to Tina.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little nervous with this little bird.
Okay, Tina, here it goes.
I'll pass it to Taylor. Taylor Valentine.
And is the ball being passed around? I know the parakeet
Tina
is.
has it. Do you want me to pass it? I don't know if she's there. So shall I pass it to someone else?
Yes,
Oh, I
please.
wish I could live in the trees too. Yes, I do. All right.
I'll pass this to Jan.
Who do you want to go to? Oh, you want to go to Studio Nikunja. Okay. Here you go, Studio Nikunja.
Amanda, thank you for the ball. I'm going to pass this to Lynn Ditchfield. It's a striped ball here in Newfoundland. Here it comes, Lynn.
How can I see the names?
And Lynn, you can now bring it back to me.
Okay, bring it back.
I can and then I think Taylor, you can bring also back. And then we are going to put the ball down and take back the parakeet back to the forest. Yeah, thank you, everyone. So we can.
Can I ask something?
For sure, yes.
Yeah, I would like to, because I have so much experience with this kind of storytelling and reconciliation processes, and I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about the philosophy of Ubuntu in relation to the reconciliation process and storytelling. Basically, how I understood this meeting between the torturers and the victims, and to speak about it and to have to expose actually the reality of things. It's also a form of storytelling, and this helped actually to undergo this whole process. But maybe you could talk about this underlying philosophy of Ubuntu, which seemed to me very important in regards to that.
Yeah, so thanks for that. That's a very brilliant question. And so the thing is with Ubuntu, it's based on the African philosophy of I am because we are. So it's more or less the social assets that African communities and societies have had for thousands of years as indigenous people. And so in terms of reconciliation and healing, it's because when harms are done in our society, in our world, it's not just about it's not about the crime that has been committed. It's always about how that crime has affected the relationship between a person and the community they belong to. Because community belonging is an asset. It's one of the things that are really valuable. In South Africa, for example, where Ubuntu mostly originated from, and it was propagated a lot by people like Desmond Tutu Emeritus, based on South African troubled history, but also looking at those countries. One of the indigenous forms of punish, kind of like bringing back people who were offended, was, for example, the story has been told of people being left, for example, in an open space, and then the community members coming and telling them the good things they did in the past in the center of the community. So they are being told, I was sick one time, you helped me carry my water bottle or my pot with water. Young person, you did that. And then this person is reminded all the good things they did. And then on the final day, a circle process happens where this person comes and the people in the circle tells them, repeats the good things they did. And then now the person is allowed to talk about their own experiences and how they feel about what they did, the crime they committed, to the community. And that's where Ubuntu philosophy comes. There's holding people accountable for the things they do, but also uttermostly supporting healing, kind of providing a way to heal underlying causes of trauma and things that make people kind of get caught up in the cycles of violence. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. It's like this, to leave actually the idea of revenge or the idea of punishment as a retribution to a crime, really, no?
Yeah, and also like meeting the needs of the perpetrator and the victims, because where there is large-scale trauma, sometimes it's very difficult to know to put the finger on the perpetrator and the victim, because the cycles of violence keeps making sometimes the victims to become the perpetrator in the next episode. And if the cycle is not broken.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So Madeline, you'll help me in this session if people want to ask questions or anything.
I see Jan has a hand up, and afterwards I think there's something in the comments from Eric.
Yes, John, please go ahead.
Bonface, thank you so much for this. A wonderful opportunity to learn with you and from you. I am very privileged to work with parents and children at an Association for New Canadians in Newfoundland in Canada. I was excited to hear that you survived a Winnipeg winter. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how we avoid or help to not re-traumatize families and children who have experienced so much pain. I will tell you that I have been using art to draw, and they've been making picture books together, parents and children, and drawing a memory. But I'm sensitive to the fact that I'm coming from a place of privilege and not having endured months in a refugee camp or in conflict. And I wonder if you could talk about how the arts has been used sensitively that way, or experiences you might have. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. So usually, I think healing, especially the work that you do, is really great, and I really appreciate that. And Canada is leading in many ways on the front of healing work. So I am also very happy that I was connected to some of the community work that has been happening there. The thing is, this question has been asked in many instances, especially in our context. When you work in places like Somalia or even in Kenya, some context here, you find that people are exposed to a lot of traumatizing experiences. And sometimes when you do the work with the communities, you find maybe this thing of you're going to re-traumatize people coming up a lot. But we found out much of our work, and especially what the art can be able to tease out and metaphorize and create a container for, is the truth-telling part. Because truth-telling, there is no better story than the story that is based on truth-telling. I think that is the most important thing that we should be able to kind of understand, because truth-telling, and people tell their truth in their own ways. And some of the ways that people might be able to tell the truth can also look like kind of like re-traumatizing to other people. So that is why, as facilitators, we are also called to kind of hold a space or a brave space for difficult conversations. But at the same time, the arts kind of provide a metaphor that helps kind of people to safely frame their victimhood experiences or perpetrator experiences towards healing and transformation, or breaking the cycle in a more safer way. The arts become safer ways to deal with these kind of situations or this kind of difficult re-traumatizing experiences, because the art provide the container that ordinarily maybe just talking about it might not be able to help, especially when you are because there is a lot of obsession. There is a lot of obsession with like talk therapy, like tell the story of what happened to you. When I was working with newcomer young people in Winnipeg, who was suffering kind of racism because they can't, because they were perceived as people who have brought new problems in our communities by host communities, not because host communities are bad, just because it's a new experience. And it's very traumatizing to kind of encounter new people with different cultures. When we worked with them, with the young people, when we talked about the stories of home, we moved away and we worked through workshops, preparation workshops for playback theater, because it's a very unique type of theater. You need to learn the art forms. We worked with them, and the young people said, we are not going to talk about home in terms of the usual stories that everybody wants to hear. How did you run away from Somalia? How did you escape from Liberia? You know, in some communities, this is what people are always told to say, like, if you can. So tell us a pitiful story about how you ran away from this conflict in a refugee camp. They said, no, we want to tell stories from a very strength-based point of view. And we are not refusing to acknowledge what we have gone through, our truth. We are not denying our truth, but we want to tell our stories for transformation. So stories of home has to be inclusive storytelling. If you're a Canadian person, resident living sitting with us in that session, you also have a story to tell about home. Maybe your home story. You also have a story to tell. So we made the storytelling to be inclusive storytelling, and the art playback became very, very powerful in terms of creating a container for inclusive storytelling, rather than the stories of kind of distancing people from others. To say you are the victim, you can always tell the story of fleeing from a conflict, or the story of a refugee, rather than the story of a human being trying to connect with other people.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you. Eric, I see you have a comment in the chat. Would you mind unmuting and asking?
Sure, Bonface. I was interested in, the stress on the artists involved in this work when they work in refugee or conflict settings. First of all, if how you think about their burnout or their own trauma, and whether this is somewhat different for those who are working in, a theater for peace, wonder if there's something different about that section of Arts for Peace than in others.
Yeah, that's a very, very powerful question. And thanks for that, Eric. Good to see you. Yes, so when we work in this context, these are very highly traumatizing contexts. So the trauma is very present, but the beauty about, so what makes the artists, many of us kind of, so I don't know, so the word thrive or survive is very contested in this experience. And I have people like Maxwell in the room who I've worked with in this kind of situations. The difference between us and any other person working in these conflict zones or in these situations of violence that is very pervasive and traumatizing is that somehow carrying the stories in our bodies, carrying the stories in the bodies has a way, and especially when you're facilitating art-based processes, is a way in which we are able to kind of externalize the stories, but also debrief better. Is a way of debriefing using embodied experiences better than anybody else who might be able just to be working in these areas, because, and many of it happens not necessarily when you even know about it. Much of it happens many times. The arts, expressive arts, have a way of helping people to kind of process difficult experiences even when they don't know about it. Whether it's therapeutic, that's, but if it turns out theatrically fantastic, that's good, but it also becomes therapeutic in many ways. We find artists in some of the most, like in South Sudan, when I worked with artists in South Sudan, in the picture that I was showing, many of them were already doing their artwork, even without anybody else telling them, do this kind of work for therapy, you know? And that is how it was helping them to cope. So the artists use their creativity and imagination and kind of embodied story ways of responding and processing difficult experiences, and somehow it looks like it helps them to cope better than others, because we see in most of these contexts they're also supporting others. We see artists studying this painting or these drumming sessions in a community that has violent extremism or has gender-based violence, survivors of gender-based violence working with an artist to kind of do a drumming circle. We are seeing these kind of things. So there is need also to continue kind of highlighting these things and doing a lot of research around them. But the main point, especially for us as a lab, is to show that there is something unique happening in these spaces that can actually be learned from, and we can develop a practice to support people in this kind of liminal spaces.
Thank you, Bonface.
You're welcome.
I'm conscious we only have a few minutes left before I know a lot of people will need to run off to other calls. So we have one more question I see with a hand up from Peter. If there are any others, please do put them in the chat and maybe Bonface can follow up with you. And Bonface, can I suggest you put some links in the chat to either your email address or how people can keep up with your work if they have more questions?
Okay.
And just while you're typing that, I'll go to Peter for the last question.
Hey, Boniface, brother.
How are you, brother?
My brother. All right, just a quick one. I am very much impressed about what you are doing. So a quick one. I have been having a 3-day private as therapy session with selected teaching artists in a residence close to my father's place. And I discovered something lately. Two participants had an overflow of emotions that I never expected. And I wasn't prepared for that. So I have to have a strategic way of halting the session. And I took these 2-3 people off to handle them. And trust me, I couldn't handle them. So then this exercise prompted me that I need to get extra help when I'm doing this again. So the question is, how do you handle an overflow of emotions, trauma, some of them can be an overflow. How do you handle that? Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, that's a very good question, and this happens often. So as a lab, we are not an expert on everything. We are sitting in this unique space where, because we know the arts are being used for therapy, the arts are being used in education, the arts are being used in like there is climate theater artist action group. So they across a spectrum, a whole gamut of spectrum of things. So it's critical also when you work like arts, when you work in your space, it would be very useful to work with therapists, for example, or clinicians, or people who have also expertise in psychological support of people, like they have a background in psychology, or they're clinicians, or they can be able to support people. So it's recommendable that you work also with psychologists or cancer psychologists, or people can hold space for people and they have training, specialized training in that. So that's what our lab is interested in. If you are working with activists or gender-based violence specialists, it's with the experts, but also with people with lived experience at the same time. Yeah.
Well, that was excellently timed as an answer, may I say.
Yeah.
I think just for time, we have to wrap up here. I will encourage everyone, because I see the chat's been really active, and I think there's quite a lot of expertise just among the participants here. So if you want to share some links or anything like that to keep in touch with each other, please do. I'll leave the call open for a few minutes so people can extract those. If you haven't signed up to ITAC, please do. I've just shared the link. But Bonface, are there any closing statements or provocations you want to offer just while we wrap this up?
Yeah, so for now you can get, so we are building our website, we're building all our materials, we'll be having our website up, and then we'll also have training for facilitators who want to use, after these kind of labs, we will be able to create a practice kind of tools that facilitators who want to use, like Atsu, what you're saying, you can use that. And you can find lots of my work right now on LinkedIn, and as well as my email, which I've just shared in the chat. Kindly feel free to reach out. I'm very interested in keeping up the conversation with all of you, because I would like to kind of work with people who know what is happening in this area, in this arena that we are working in, that is very unique. Back to you, Madeleine.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone for joining. That was the quickest hour. So I hope that you can all stay in touch and follow up with one another about all this amazing work and all the really rich tools and resources that are being shared right now. I'm going to leave the call open just for a couple of minutes so that you can extract any of these email addresses, links before I just close it. You can save the chat in the bottom right-hand corner, hopefully. And if you have any follow-up thoughts, I encourage you to reach out to Bonface with them. I hope we'll see you next month and all the months after for our other think tanks. If you have something you'd like to share, please email me. You have my address because I've been emailing you the Zoom links. And if there's anything else, don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you so much. We'll go quiet, we'll end here, but the call won't end straight away, so you can get the chat. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.